is going to continue with Chapter 7, the skeletal system. And what I want you to focus on today is look more at the structure of the bones, because if you're not careful and you're not paying attention, you won't really understand how the structure affects the function. Is everyone clear on that? And I believe we got through the 4 classifications of bones by shape. Is that correct?
Yes.
Long, short, irregular, all that? Okay, good. So looking at the microscopic structure of the bone itself, there are 2 different types of bone. The first is what most people think of. It's called compact bone. And those of you that got here, please get your gear out before you come in if you're going to come in late. The compact bone is dense, it is hard, it is rigid. It is what contributes the most to the weight of the bone. It's what gives the most support and the most protection. It's generally going to be the outer part of the bone. Another name for it is cortical bone. Cortical bone. It has a continuous extracellular matrix with no gaps. A continuous extracellular matrix with no gaps. The other type is called spongy bone. Spongy bone. Another name for it is cancellous bone. C-A-N-C-E-L-L-O-U-S. Cancellous bone. Spongy bone has a hard and rigid ECM, but it has spaces between the trabeculae, T-R-A-B-E-C-U-L-A-E. The trabeculae are plates they have spaces between them. This serves 2 purposes. Number 1, it reduces the overall weight of the bone. It reduces the overall weight of the bone. Now, we talked about 7 different functions for the skeletal system. But keep in mind, we also have to balance those functions against each other. That is why you don't want to be hauling around solid bone, because it would make movement very difficult, wouldn't it? And that would put wear and tear on other systems, as you're going to see when we talk next chapter about joints. So is everybody clear on this? The other thing is it gives space for what we call bone marrow. Bone marrow. So consider a long bone. We've all seen them in the lab now, haven't we? That long shaft is the main part of the bone, and it's called the epiphysis. The epiphysis. E-P-I-P-H-Y-S-I-S. The one nearest the torso is the distal. The one furthest away is the proximal. Oh, excuse me, I got that backwards. Proximal is nearest, distal is distant. Sorry. Thanks for catching that, Kylie. The ends of the bone, excuse me, boy, I am getting mixed up today. Start over. The shaft is the hypophysis, or excuse me, diaphysis. Caffeine hasn't kicked in yet. The diaphysis is the shaft. Is everybody clear on that? The diaphysis is the shaft. The hypophyses are the area between the diaphysis and the ends, which are the epiphyses. Take a look at figure 7.2, and it will clarify it for you. The main thing to remember is that the growth occurs on both ends. Does everybody see that? The metaphysis, those are the plates that allow for the growth. The overall bone is surrounded by what we call the periosteum. The periosteum is essentially just a dense fibrous connective tissue, and it is contiguous with both ligaments and tendons. There is not an end point, if you will. Essentially, it is just a continuous, the periosteum of this bone grows into the ligament which connects the periosteum of this bone, all as one essential unit. Does everybody see that? It's important to make sure you understand that. Yes, ma'am. No, it's connective tissue covering the bone. It's not a membrane. I know what you're thinking, but a membrane is thin and it's not tough. The periosteum is very tough. You think of a ligament, you think of how hard they are to tear. If you've ever had a drumstick, you know the little stringy things, those are the tendons. It's very tough. It's not very thick, but I want you to understand, a lot of people get the idea that the bone is distinct from the ligament, which is distinct from the bone. And they worry that the anchor points are weak. Well, no, because the anchor is the entire bone itself. That's why it is so hard to tear a ligament, because they're very dense. Does that help? Do you have a question? Okay. The inside of the bone is hollow. We call this the medullary cavity, It is lined by the endosteum, The endosteum is also connective tissue, but unlike the periosteum, this one is thin. It puts down the bone. It's what produces the bone. The spongy bone is also lined with the endosteum. The spaces between the trabeculae and the spongy bone in the medullary cavity is very often going to be filled with what we call marrow. Marrow is considered to be a specialized connective tissue. And it comes in two forms. Basically, the ECM of this is going to be a liquid. It's going to be a viscous liquid. And the two forms are classified by the color. The first is what we call the yellow marrow, the yellow marrow. It does not have any function except fat storage. It stores fat. The red marrow, on the other hand, is where you get hematopoiesis. And before you ask, yes, you do need to know that term. Does anybody need me to spell it?
Yes, please.
Hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis. That's the formation of blood cells, not red blood cells, but all. The formation of blood cells. Most of these are going to be red blood cells or erythrocytes. The typical lifespan of an erythrocyte is about 3 to 4 months. So your body is constantly filtering these out, breaking them down, recycling the iron, and forming new red blood cells that are released through the spleen. Is everybody clear on that? White blood cells, or leukocytes, Leukocytes, are also formed in the red marrow. It's obviously going to be called red because most of the cells that are formed there are red because they contain hemoglobin. Better than 95% of the cells in the blood are erythrocytes. But I want you to be aware that the leukocytes are also produced in the red marrow. Is everyone clear on that? As are the least common type of blood cell, and these are called platelets. Platelets, honestly, some people don't even consider them to be cells. Essentially, they're cellular fragments that are broken off and allowed to circulate. Everybody knows the functions of those three, right? Erythrocytes, red blood cells. If you ever want to abbreviate it, capital R, capital B, capital C, that's convention. If you use that on a test, it's fine. They carry oxygen and CO2. Leukocytes are white blood cells. If you want to call those WBCs, that's also acceptable. Does anybody know what their function is? Oh dear, looks like we need to start going back to quizzes.
Infection.
The immune response. Infections, antibodies, play a role in healing, cellular recycling, and then platelets. Does anybody know their role?
Don't they attach to, they attach to something?
Don't they fix up wounds?
Blood clots. They are what causes clotting. Ideally, you would want that to be in wounds, but as you said, they attach to things.
Yeah.
So if you get what they call thrombosis, which is clot formation in a blood vessel, and it breaks off, that's not a good thing because now you have a solid chunk floating in your bloodstream. If that solid chunk gets stuck in a smaller blood vessel in your brain, does anybody know what that's called?
Isn't that stroke?
Well, the technical term is an ischemic attack, which the fancy name is ischemic attack, but the common name is stroke. Essentially, all of the tissue downstream from the blockage dies. And I see nobody writing that down. That's not the only place it can cause a problem. True or false, your heart benefits from the blood that pumps through the main chambers.
False.
False, because it actually has its own blood supply. Did you know that? You have coronary arteries and you have coronary veins. If you get a clot blocking a coronary artery, again, not good. All of the coronary muscle tissue downstream from the blockage will die. We call that a myocardial infarction. Does anybody know what the technical, or the not term? Heart attack. Remember, folks, once that tissue dies, you're dead. Not, well, it's dead. If you lose enough, you definitely die. You had a frown on your face, Gabby. Did you need something? I said, you've got a frown on your face. Did you need me to repeat something?
No.
Okay. But remember, we said one of the key functions of the skeletal system is blood production, right? So hematopoiesis is critical for survival. If you get leukemia, essentially what you have is uncontrolled cell division in the red marrow. Leukemia is basically cancer of the blood.
Are you recording by chance?
You're welcome. You guys have gotten so good at reminding me, I seem to have developed the habit of it. And unlike my other classes, you all actually seem to go to the YouTube channel and listen to them. I don't expect dozens of views, but as long as I see 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, I'm reasonably satisfied that it's worth the effort. Because it's just like any other thing. It's a tool. If it helps you learn, I'm all for it. So y'all want me to keep recording them? How many of you actually use them? It doesn't have to be everybody. Like I said, if I've only got 2 or 3 people, but you're consistent with it, I'm cool with that. The labeling that I put on there, okay, everybody's generally able to find what's yours and what's not yours. Okay, good. So back to leukemia. Does anybody know the standard treatment for it?
Isn't it just chemo? Like they can't treat it exactly, or they're trying to.
Well, generally what they do is they do 2 things. They do chemo to kill what's circulating, and then they hit your bone marrow with high intensity radiation to essentially kill your bone marrow. Why would they do that? Well, because that wipes out all of the cells. When I was a child, back in the 70s, leukemia was pretty well a death sentence. In the 80s, they developed a new technique called a bone marrow transplant. A bone marrow transplant. If they can find someone who is a close enough match to you immunologically to be a donor, they will nuke your bone marrow. Then they will go into the donor. They'll insert a big horse needle into their bones and literally draw the red marrow out, go to the patient and put it in. If it takes, they have essentially cured it. Got a fairly good success rate if you have a suitable donor. As you might imagine, the donor registry is not exactly brimming with volunteers, because not many people want to have somebody stick a horse needle through their muscle and bone to draw out marrow. Did you have a question?
I've always heard that's one of the most like painful transplants you can have. Like, is that true?
I would say any transplant is going to be painful for both.
Yeah.
I had my gallbladder taken out 2 years ago. It wasn't a bad surgery, it wasn't a bad recovery, but it still was not the most pleasant experience I've had in my life. And things like a living liver transplant, where they take out a chunk of your liver, because it will regenerate. I won't lie, the number of people that I would willingly do that for is probably something you could count on one hand. And 2 of those are blood relatives, my mother and my brother. My niece is adopted, but I would do it for her. And this is being recorded, but don't share this. I'm not entirely sure I would for my sister-in-law. But yeah, it's considered a very painful procedure. But there is an anonymous registry where you can basically register that you're willing if somebody was found that needs it. There was a young lady who was a student here, I think it was 2 years ago, that had leukemia, and they found a donor for her off the registry and successfully treated her. She was 22, and the last I heard, she's doing fine, complete remission. I knew about that because they held a registry drive, and I don't think they found a donor for her through the registry drive, but there was somebody else who'd registered elsewhere. It was great publicity to get people to be aware of it and volunteer to be donors. I encourage people to do that. I think I've told you all about blood types, haven't I? Did I share that with you?
I was gonna join the blood drive here, but I couldn't find them redoing it, cause they canceled it due to the snow. But I couldn't.
Call up Medic. What's your blood type?
It's O negative, I believe.
Don't call up the Red Cross,
Oh, okay.
because you and I share the same misfortune. We are type O negative. We are the universal donor. We could give to every single person in this room without worry of causing a rejection. Did you all realize that?
I didn't know that.
This is why I say don't call the Red Cross, because once you get your name on their list, these people are worse than the Scientologists. You're never, ever going to escape them. They will call you every 8 weeks on the day, to the day, and they will offer to assist you with a ride to the donation center. They one time called me up and offered to bring the bus from the high school to my house after it was over. And I said, "You talking to the van?" They said, "Oh, no, we got the bus today, but we'll bring it right to your." I said, "No, you won't." "Sure, it's no problem." I said, "Ma'am, if the school bus can't get up this narrow little road, your bus can't get up this narrow little road."
I gave up in high school one time and I passed out. It was so bad.
Well, when you think about the amount of blood you're losing, it takes quite some time to replace it.
I think I'm
You're-
A negative or something.
If you're type O negative, you are the universal donor. They don't normally give O negative blood unless it's a trauma, they have a high need for it, like 4 or 5 units, and they haven't had time to type somebody. Why is that the case? Because they know it's safe. If something happened to Jace, and we had to set up a donation here and now, or he'll die, I know based on testimony, there's 2 people that could give him some blood. It may not be a perfect match. Once they get him to the hospital, they'll cross-type him and start giving him, let's assume it's A positive, for example. O type O. But see, the problem is, if you're a universal donor, you can only accept from that same type. Does anybody know what the deal is with AB positive? They're the universal acceptor. They can accept anybody's blood. But they can only give to another AB positive. I can only accept from another O neg. Now, I joke about the Red Cross being worse than Dracula, but simple fact of the matter is, I know my blood can help save people, so I try to share the wealth.
Why will they pay you for giving like platelets and not donating blood?
Because that's what they call plasmapheresis. What they do is they take your blood out, they spin it in a centrifuge. All of the cells spin down towards the bottom. They basically decant the liquid. They pour off the liquid and put the cells back in you. That means you don't lose the cells, so you're not anemic. But that liquid they pulled off, that has all the antibodies in it, it has all of the hormones in it, it has all of the proteins in it, the clotting factors, all of that is useful for research. Let me tell you, if you want to make money, gold is not the way. Biomolecules. I once held a test tube. The test tube was this big. It was that full. Okay? And it had enough enzyme in it that had been grown in the lab in a bacterium, extracted and purified, that it was probably worth about $10 million. And believe it or not, it was technically illegal. Why? Because the company that took the gene out of the original bacterium copyrighted it, trademarked it, and sold it commercially. However, if you run a molecular biology lab, you have the skills to extract a gene from a wild source, don't you? So instead of using the commercially sold stuff, you go out to the pond or hot springs and grab your own sample of the bacterium, extract the gene from it, stick it into another bacterium and grow it in your lab and purify it. Pretty wild. Don't worry, the names and dates have been changed. Statute of limitations has run out. Haley's like, I don't believe you. I've done a few things in my day, okay? I've been a bootlegger. Did I tell you all that story? Bootlegging Freon? I'll tell you that someday. Anyway, back to this. The only example of curing AIDS is actually done by the same way. Y'all heard this story? Would y'all like to? To make it a long story short, there is a mutant form of a cellular receptor. That cellular receptor is called CCR5, cellular co-receptor number 5. It's a protein that's found on the surface of white blood cells that actually pulls the virus in. There is a mutation that arose about 800 years ago in Northern Europe called CCR5 Delta 32, Delta being the Greek triangle. It means that 32 of the nucleotides in that gene were deleted. So rather than make a full-length functional protein, it makes a short, fragmented protein that's non-functional. If you have one copy of that, then you resist the onset of symptomatic AIDS by up to 2 years from infection. So in other words, if two people got infected at the same time, the one who's heterozygous for the mutated form would develop symptoms 2 years later. If you're homozygous for it, meaning both copies are the mutant, you appear to be immune. You will test HIV positive, but there is no measurable viral load in your body. Viruses can't get into your cells. There was one case of a man in Northern Europe, specifically Germany, who had been infected with AIDS for over 20 years. It progressed. He finally lost his immune system, developed a rare form of leukemia, They did a bone marrow transplant as a last-ditch effort to save him. It was successful, and when they came in for his checkup 6 months later, they noted that he was still HIV positive. But here's the thing. For the first time in over 20 years, he had no viral load. And that was 20 years ago, and he still doesn't to this day. Turns out the donor was homozygous for the mutant form. How wild is that? Somebody wake up Harley. You okay?
Yeah.
Sorry I'm putting you to sleep. I won't tell y'all any more of this interesting stuff. We'll get back to the boring stuff of bones, okay? So back to the boring bones. The microscopic structure of both compact bone and spongy bone differs. When you look at compact bone, what you're going to see are cells sitting in kind of like a little pit. Those are called osteocytes, osteocytes, the bone cells. The pit they sit in is called a lamella, or lamellae plural. Essentially, they lay down plates that overlap and coat the lamella. They in turn are clustered around a central tube called the central canal or Haversian canal, Haversian. This canal contains the blood vessel, the osteocytes around it, and the canal together form a unit called an osteon, O-S-T-E-O-N. The osteons together make up the compact bone. And they typically run longitudinally with the axis, and this is what gives bone such good compressive strength. Because you have 100 plus pounds pulling you down, don't you? Your bones resist that every second of every day. Take a look at figure 7.4 and 7.5, and you will see how all this fits together. Like I said, the spongy bone contains the blood vessels and the nerves. This is not richly innervated or richly venous material. In other words, it doesn't have a lot of blood flow to it, and you don't have a lot of nerve endings in there, but you do have some. That's why when you break a bone, it hurts. Everybody clear on that? But I want to reemphasize, this is living material.
So
Now
you
this-
do, when you do break a bone, is most of the pain from like everything around your
Yeah.
bone?
But you do feel pain from the break, I assure
Right.
you. And it doesn't go away.
I've never broken a bone. I don't know.
My lowest two vertebrae have collapsed into each other and grown together. There's a reason I'm sitting like this right now. It's to prevent all of the weight of my upper torso from coming down on the spot the size
Like
of
your
a
bottom two
quarter.
right above your tailbone?
Yeah.
Mine are bulging.
Would not wish that on anyone. Care to share what you're whispering about?
That's if you ever broke a bone before.
It's like dying. 0 of 5 stars, do not recommend. That's one of those, if it's on your bucket list, I would take it off. Been there, done that, do not recommend the experience. Not even if you're a tourist.
I've broken a few of mine. I've broken my ribs on this side.
One time I almost fell off a 200-foot bluff. I ended up breaking 2 ribs on my
That's what I
side.
did.
I told you all about that, didn't I? You all are so quiet. I don't tell you some of the stuff I tell my life sciences class, apparently. Someday I'll tell you all about my adventures. almost falling off a bluff, bootlegging Freon. I told you about being in the sights of an M16 down on the US-Mexican border, didn't I?
No.
Yeah, that was fun. And the best part was, those 10 or 15 minutes, I didn't know it. I'm just out there goofing off in the desert. Somebody's sitting up there, got a bead on me, cock lock and ready to rock, as the cop put it. So back to spongy bone. Spongy bone has more open space. The osteocytes are still present. The ECM is still present. Extracellular matrix. That's what ECM stands for. But the bone cells do not congregate around a central canal. Instead, they lie flat and secrete the trabeculae out, and that's what gives it that plate-like shape. Everybody clear on that? Questions? All right, bone function. Three most important ones: support, protection, and movement. We've already mentioned these. Bone has great compressive strength. That means from the top down. Question?
I thought you said there was other reasons behind it, like what it does. Like, for example, blood production and endocrine production.
I'm getting there.
Oh.
We go through it stepwise. Those are your three most important ones. Number one is compressive strength. You can't really push it down and make it crumble. You really have to be doing something to do that. Is everybody clear on that? Bone does not have great tensile strength. That means from the side. It's much stronger compressive than it is in tensile. Is everybody clear on that? And bones are typically not very elastic. They're rigid. So they don't twist or bend. It's impossible really to separate the three of these functions because they do all three of them at the same time. Your spinal cord is supporting your upper body and your skull, right? But at the same time, it's armor against a blow to the back. But it also serves as anchor points for various tendons to allow you to move your torso and your arms, doesn't it? You see where I'm going with this? If you want to include all three of those as one but differentiate out the three separate forms, that's fine because it's all connected. That's why we talk about the skeletal system. It's all a single function, essentially, because it's all simultaneous. Hematopoiesis does not typically happen in every single cell. Infants and young children, their bones, pretty much all of them, have red marrow. As a person ages, most of that gets replaced by yellow marrow. In an adult, you'll typically find it in the skull, the ribs, the sternum, clavicles, vertebrae, and the hips, the pelvic girdle. If you don't have enough red marrow to produce enough blood cells, the yellow marrow can and will convert to yellow marrow, or the yellow marrow will convert to red marrow and produce that. Once your blood supply is back up, it will essentially convert back. Mineral storage. Mineral storage. This is probably the one function that surprises most people. You typically don't think of your skeleton as a supply dump, do you? You think of growing bone and building bone, healing bone, repairing broken bones, but you probably don't think that your body is going to break down its own support structure when it needs minerals, but it does happen. The reason for this is that about 70% of the ECM of bone is calcium phosphate. Technically, this is the same form you would find if you were mining it from rocks. Hydroxyapatite. That's the technical name for those crystals. The body requires calcium for its normal physiological functions. Muscle contraction, nerve impulse conduction, formation of clots. Those are 3 examples of why you need calcium. When we get to those sections, we will talk about the specific role that calcium plays in that. But the key here is to remember is that it generally is involved in ionic concentrations. Ionic concentrations. When you're low in calcium, parathyroid glands, which sit right up here on either side of the esophagus, they secrete a hormone that stimulates cells called osteoclasts to break down the bone. If you have too much calcium in the blood, the thyroid releases another hormone that inhibits the osteoclasts and stimulates bone formation. So the osteoblasts will then lay down new bone. So osteoblasts lay down bone, osteoclasts break down bone, and osteocytes are normal bone cells with their normal function. Osteoblasts build bone, osteoclasts break down bone, osteocytes are normal bone cells with normal function. So everybody okay with that? Now, I mentioned that it also functions as part of the endocrine system. There is a hormone called osteocalcin. This is secreted by the osteoblasts, the bone builders. This also helps regulate the laying down of calcium in new bones. It also helps with brain development. If you have a high level of this particular hormone, it's very often a sign of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis. Y'all know what osteoporosis is, right? Brittle bones. Essentially, in osteoporosis, the bone density decreases. The density of this compact bone decreases. And this makes the bones more fragile, which means they're more likely to break. Is everybody okay? Stop and take 30 seconds to stretch, pop your joints. How many pages of notes have we taken today? Y'all are letting me go too fast here.
Mine just one big note, so I don't know.
Huh?
So mine's just one big page, so I don't know.
I think I'm like 1 page. I'm like 1.5.
1.5, okay. So we're not moving too fast then. Okay. So bone development, growth, and repair, section 7.4, page 214, I believe. Yeah. Or 91 if you're following along on the electronic version. And the skeletal system begins to develop during pregnancy. The bones continue to develop and grow into adulthood. And basically what's going to happen is two things. Number one, connective tissue is going to be laid down. Number two, it is going to be replaced by bone. Is everybody clear on that? Now there are two mechanisms for this. The first are called intramembranous bones. Intramembranous bones. And in this case, the bones are laid down in a sheet-like layer of cartilage. They're laid down in a sheet-like layer of cartilage. The other, endochondral bones, they're laid down as hyaline cartilage that's later replaced by bone. The intramembranous bones are typically going to be flat bones, the skull, clavicles, sternum. And you've got a tissue called mesenchyme, which is just embryonic connective tissue, appears at the side of the future bones. These cells then differentiate into osteoblasts, and those deposit the matrix around each other. Eventually, they're completely surrounded by ECM. They exist within what we call a lacunae, L-A-C-U-N-A-E, which is kind of just like a little pit. And at this point, they're considered to be osteocytes, normal function. An outer layer of this becomes the periosteum, the outer layer of that mesenchyme. And this process as a whole is called ossification. Ossification literally just means hardening, becoming hard. Questions? Okay. Next up, we've got endochondral ossification, or the endochondral bones. Most of these will form the bones throughout the body. This is what you probably think of when you think of bone development. The framework gets laid down as hyaline cartilage. We lay the framework down as hyaline cartilage. So that acts almost as a scaffolding. It forms the model for the shape of the developing bone. Then, part of that forms the periosteum, while the rest of it begins to break down, and osteoblasts replace the cartilage osteoblasts from the periosteum begin to replace the cartilage. They do this by forming spongy bone. And once the cartilage framework has been replaced with the spongy bone, the compact bone begins to form inward from the periosteum. The osteoblasts lay down the rest of the matrix. They are now osteocytes. Congratulations, you have formed an endochondral bone. Is everyone clear on that? Table 7.1 does a really good job of summarizing both of these procedures. That is located on page 91 electronic, page 216 in the hard copy. If you want to see the development of an endochondral bone, take a look at figure 7.10. Now remember, at that point, the bone is fully developed, right? The bone is the bone. But as we all know, kids grow, don't they? If you don't believe that, check out my niece. Kid turns 12 in about 4 weeks, and I swear she grows an inch a week. Yesterday, my brother picked her up, and then they stopped by the house, and I was wondering why, and it was just so she could get a cold Coke. She's always drinking my Cokes and eating my ice cream. You have a question?
I have a question about the development of bones in the skull. Mainly because I've heard that babies are born with like a soft spot in their skull. Is that just a side effect of this?
No. Does anybody know what limits the size of a human fetus?
Doesn't it have to do with how they have to go through the birth canal?
Bingo, the birth canal. There is a simple limit on how much you can fit through that space. So that means the skull of an infant can only be so big. However, if you ever bring an infant up to you while you're holding them and cuddling them, you will see that their head is smaller than yours, isn't it? Why? Well, that is because the bones of the skull have not completely joined at their joints. Believe it or not, your skull has a specific type of joint called a suture. S-U-T-U-R-E. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter, but when you are in lab today studying the bones, take a look at a skull and you'll see right down the top here what looks kind of like a jagged lightning bolt. In an infant, those are not two hard plates fused together at an immobile joint. They are two hard plates separated by cartilage that is still undergoing the process of growth and will eventually fuse whole. Does that answer your question? And why do you need that? Because the brain has to continue to develop and grow. believe it or not, the vast majority of you in here, your brains are not fully developed. Did you realize that?
Aren't they like not fully developed till you're 26 or something?
About 25 or 26. It varies in between male and female. They vary at different rates. When I got married, 3 months after that, I turned 25. My car insurance was billed every 6 months. So about 2 months after my birthday, I got my next bill, and I immediately called my insurance agent because I was really worried that they had canceled part of my coverage or something because my premiums had been reduced by 60%. I got the receptionist, and she immediately called up my account and said, "No, your coverage hasn't changed." And I said, "What on earth is, because this is too low." And she said, "You had any major life events happen?" I said, "I got married." She said, "That was definitely about half of that." And she said, "By chance, did you turn 25? And I said, "Yes." She said, "Okay, so you went from an unmarried male under 25 to a married male over 25. She said, "Both of those, you have moved into a significantly lower risk category." That's how insurance works. But if the skull is already fused at infancy, can it continue to expand and grow and develop? There you go. One of you had a question, or both of you, Piper and or
You
Desiree.
answered mine. I have a question. I've heard things about with ADHD that your brain doesn't stop developing until you're a lot older than that point. And I was just curious if that's actually.
We're getting a bit further afield,
Sorry.
and we're getting into stuff we'll be talking about in the later chapters. But there is something called phenotypic plasticity. Another way to put it is neuroplasticity. Do y'all know how a memory forms? Essentially, your brain fires a specific sequence of nerves. The more it fires that sequence of nerves, the easier it becomes to fire that sequence of nerves. Does that make sense? The more often you fire it, the more often you access it, the stronger the memory. You don't forget how to walk, do you? You don't think about it, but you use those nerves every day, don't you? You see how it works? Now, what happens if something destroys that? Can you relearn how to walk?
Yeah.
I did. Did I tell you how long it took me?
Like,
About 9 or 10 months. I didn't time it exactly to the day, but it was a long period of time. I was 40 when that happened. If that had happened to Jace, do you think it would take him as long? Exact same set of circumstances? Because his brain would essentially rewire itself. Do I stop learning? I'm 56 and a half, and I actually found out about a brand new to me short story by one of my favorite authors that I'd never heard of that was written in the 70s. That was over the weekend, and believe it or not, just in my normal daily routines, I've actually caught 3 separate references to that story since then that I wouldn't have known what they were referring to. See where I'm going with this? A lot of you commented that you like asking me questions because I know a lot of things. Yes, I do. That's because I've been around about 3 times as long as you've had, so I've had 3 times as much opportunity. But here's the kicker. It's far more difficult for me to rewire my brain at this age than it is for you. There is something to the grumpy old man. Get off my lawn. I will freely admit I really do not like it when they release a new operating system for a computer or a tablet. I still don't see any advantage to Windows 11. I'd be willing to bet most of you probably made the switch without any difficulty. Does that help?
It does.
So back to bones, because you let me go off the rails there. In the long bones, you get growth at the epiphyseal plate. Remember, the epiphyses are at the end there, and that allows the bone to grow like this, both ways. That's how the bones lengthen. If you take a look at figure 7.12 on page 217, you'll see the zones in the epiphyseal plate. At the top, you've got what they call the zone of resting cartilage. This is connective tissue that is not doing anything except just sitting there. It's an anchor. Everybody clear on that? Below that, you've got the zone of proliferating cartilage. This is undergoing active cell division and growth. Make sure you get that down. Below that, you've got what's called the zone of hypertrophic cartilage. These guys are beginning to lay down that calcified ECM. They die, and below that you've got osteoclast breaking down the zone of calcified cartilage. And at that point, it's replaced with bone. Table 7.2 gives you a good idea of the timetable of ossification. Basically, when do you stop growing? And not surprisingly, you see age 15 to 18 for females, 17 to 20 for males, that teenage growth spurt, right? Notice that ossification is nearly complete by 23 in females, 25 in males. Questions? All right, take a look at figure 7A. Go under 7.1 clinical application, and it discusses fractures or break in the bone. And a lot of how well or how easily a break heals is dependent upon what type of break it is. You do need to know those 6 types. Green stick is a partial break. A fissure is a longitudinal break. Both of those are incomplete.
Where is this at in the book? I can't find it, I'm sorry.
Page 219, homeostasis of bone tissue. Below that, you'll see a big section in blue labeled 7.1 clinical application. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then you look down and you see 6 different broken bones in figure 7A, and that is where you find it. Anybody else need guidance? A comminuted break or fracture is probably about the worst you can get, because essentially it has shattered the bone. That requires surgery to fix. A transverse is a complete break, but it's generally fairly straight. An oblique occurs at something other than a right angle. And then finally, you get a spiral fracture, which is typically caused by twisting. Everybody clear on that? The periosteum is generally torn as part of a break. That causes blood to spread and form what we call a hematoma. That can be a real problem if it happens inside the skull, because the skull doesn't open up, does it? You ever heard of a brain bleed? Well, when I fell off the bluff, or nearly fell off, I should say, I was at the top of a slight slope that went down about 30 feet and then dropped straight down 200 feet into a river. It had rained the night before. What I didn't realize is this layer of dead leaves was over a layer of slick mud. So when I stepped on the leaves, my feet slipped out from under me. I began sliding towards the lip of the cliff, and I literally had one chance to stop myself from going over, and that was to grab a tree that was growing right up at the cliff. It caught me like this here. It knocked me out because I got a blow to the head. When I came to, my feet were dangling over the cliff. My arm was wrapped around the tree. I was bleeding from a cut so bad, basically I was blind in my left eye. I could tell immediately I'd had a couple of ribs broken. And I've got to get back up the slope into my car and drive myself 15 miles to the hospital because nobody knows where I'm at. They weren't worried at all about the cut. Stitch it, it's fine. The ribs are painful, but wrap it up in an elastic belt. But what they were really concerned about was something called a subdural hematoma. They were worried that I had bleeding under my skull and pressing on my brain. That's life-threatening. So everybody understand the problem with this? And remember, you can get a skull fracture too. Generally though, it will drain or be reabsorbed on its own. And for me, I was fortunate I did not have one. What I had done is messed up my inner ear and my left ear, so I still have problems with vertigo to this day. But that's a small price to pay for not dying, I guess. Yes, sir.
I had a buddy, he had a motorcycle wreck a couple months ago, and he had brain bleeding. Would that cause him, when he got transmitted to the hospital in Vanderbilt, could that brain bleed cause him to like act as a different person?
Sure. Anytime you have any kind of traumatic brain injury, we don't know what the effects will be.
Yeah.
Y'all ever heard the story of Phineas Gage?
Yeah.
How many of you have? Phineas Gage was a railroad foreman in the 1850s. And one of the things they had to do was explode rock. And they did that by putting dynamite in, and then they would tamp it down with an iron rod. He was tamping it down, and the dynamite exploded. The iron rod went right through here and out the top of his skull. He lived for another 12 years. But after that, his complete personality changed. He had a very short temper. He had no impulse control. He was very violent, very lewd, crude, rude. Phenotypic plasticity, but also brain injury. Everybody see that? Okay, so what happens then, once the hematoma goes down, osteoblasts from the periosteum begin to lay down a new layer of bone. Essentially, they're going to lay down the cartilage first to model it, just like we talked about in bone development. Then we're going to follow that up and lay down the new bone to repair it. Is everybody clear on that? Now, this does not happen overnight. It takes several weeks because bone does not have a large blood supply. Make sure you get that down. It heals slowly. That's why I had to be on IV antibiotics for twice as long as they normally do it. I told y'all that, didn't I? You all seem to be a little bit out of it, so let's call it there. We'll take